We'll be starting in 2 minutes for attendees coming into the room, so please just sit back, relax, and we'll get to the presentations in just about 2 minutes. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for our UWC Virtual Visit Day for March 24th, 2021. It's been a crazy year for all of us in college admissions, and we're very happy to be coming to you today to share with you some of our thoughts on some issues that are going to be relevant to you in your college search in the coming weeks and months if they haven't already reared their heads to you. What we're going to do today, my name is Marty Bennett. I'm your host for these virtual visit days, and we're very happy to be coming to you this afternoon in the US, this evening, wherever you are in the world, maybe even still early morning, depending on where you are. We are really pleased to be sharing with you today three of our UWC Davis partner institutions, some of their expertise on some key issues on standardized testing, on applying early, and obviously securing financial aid as a Davis UWC scholar. Some housekeeping details before we get to the presentations. We will be recording this session and making it available to you after the event. There will be we have a UWC virtual visit, UWC recruitment tours and events Facebook page. If you haven't already liked that, you can find that on Facebook, and we'll post the link to the recordings of these sessions on that page. Also, the landing page for the event where you'll be going to immediately after these presentations end. That's when you can, that landing page is where you'll go to connect with each of the different universities and colleges that are participating in today's event. We have 26 outstanding Davis partner institutions represented in the College Fair section of the day, and I'll share the link to the landing page automatically at the end of the presentation. You'll be redirected there, and I'll also drop a link to that landing page in the comments section or in the chat, so everybody can get that, bookmark that, and then be ready to connect with each of the colleges and universities. Now, this year, as we all know, has been a year unlike any other, and it's been a year since we all kind of went into lockdown mode. Depending on where we are in the world, some had it worse than others. Certainly in the United States, we've had a lot of high numbers of cases, the worst in the world. But we have also had the fastest rollout of multiple vaccines, which are now present for most of us. I've received my first shot of my 2-shot Moderna vaccine a week or two ago. My wife's gotten hers already. So we're excited about being able to return to somewhat more normal circumstances once that vaccine is fully implemented. And the good news is here in the US, that looks to be happening sooner rather than later. By May, President Biden has announced that he expects every adult male and female that wishes to get a vaccine should be able to do so. And that's encouraging, because that's a lot of colleges and universities. This year has been a very disruptive year on campus. Some colleges, larger colleges, had problems in the early fall with students returning after the winter break. There were cases that increased dramatically, but the resulting, I think, lessons learned from this year, and some of our panelists will have comments I'm sure they'll share in their individual rooms about how their campuses have dealt with the pandemic on campus and what life has looked like. Some of them may even have students that will be in their meeting rooms that will be sharing their experiences. And I think that's really who you want to hear from when it comes to what's life been like on college campuses this year, and particularly the ones that you're interested in. And hopefully you have that opportunity today or in the weeks to come as you develop lists of schools that you're interested in applying to next fall. Now, we know you have a lot of choice, and the great news is, as Davis scholars, you have options. There are 99 plus Davis member institutions. 26 of those are represented here today. Hopefully they cover 16 different states in the United States, of good geographic area represented here in today's fair. And we really hope that you have an opportunity to see many of those that are represented here to see as juniors, IB1 students, or even some pre-IB students. You have an opportunity to start that search. If you're a senior and you're still looking, there are some schools that might be you're getting a chance to connect with today that might still have rolling application deadlines that you might be able to squeeze in. But please know that we're here for you, and we want to make this day as productive for you as possible. And we'll get to the presentations in just a minute or two. What we will say with regard to this session, as I mentioned, they're going to be recorded. The PDFs of these presentations that you're going to see will be available on the landing page that you'll be directed to. In fact, they're already loaded on that. So you'll be able to access those right away in case you missed a slide or you want to go over a piece of information or get the email address for one of the presenters. Each of them has that information on their slides. So you'll be able to reach out to them afterwards if you have further questions that we don't get a chance to answer. I will say we are going to have hopefully time in between each of the three presentations for questions. So if you have questions, don't bother raising your hand. Just use the Q&A box or link on your main menu bar, or put it in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer those questions. Some of my panelists, when they're not presenting, may be able to answer some of those questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So we want to make sure you get those answered today. And if at all possible, you have the opportunity to get the answers you need to move your search forward. So we're going to be covering a lot of topics today that are going to be very relevant for you. The first up is going to be standardized testing. This has been a year that has culminated in so many hundreds, if well over 1,000 institutions in the United States went test optional this past year as a result of testing, frankly, not being readily available for most students in the world, as well as the US. So these policies have changed the way university admissions offices do things. And I know we had some questions in the morning session from students asking about, well, am I going to be disadvantaged if a school's test optional? Am I disadvantaged if I don't have a test score to submit because I wasn't able to take one? It wasn't safe for me to take one, whatever the case may be where you are. And that's what I think Danielle certainly covered, or excuse me, Tara is going to cover that in her presentation in just a minute or two. But certainly we want you to know that and the institutions that are represented here will each tell you their own individual answers to these questions, because there may be slight nuances depending on the campus in terms of how things are used as it relates to scholarships, as it relates to financial aid that might be impacted by test optional. So we're going to cover that for you today. And we will get started with our first presentation here. I'm going to turn it over to Tara Lindros from Wesleyan University, and she's going to be sharing the future of standardized testing for United States universities. So Tara, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Let's see, just getting all the technical pieces here set up. Thanks for your patience. Great. So I guess just to say, I previewed myself too early. Here we go. Whoa, don't look too far ahead. My name is Tara Lindros. I'm an Associate Dean of Admission at Wesleyan University. We are located in Middletown, Connecticut. I'm also the coordinator of international admission. And it's wonderful to have you all here virtually. It's obviously, for For those of us who do this international recruitment work, always a joy to be able to see you in person, but we're really happy to have this opportunity to connect with you in this virtual, virtual environment. The first thing I think I would say, I'm going to talk a little bit about standardized testing, and a little bit of this is looking, sort of into the future, into the crystal ball, and kind of trying to predict how schools will approach testing in the future. As you, I'm sure, know, many previously test requiring institutions have chosen to become test optional, either for just this past year or for a certain number of years into the future. What we don't know at this point is whether that will become a permanent change for those institutions. We don't know fully how many of them will stay test optional even for this upcoming admission cycle. We do know that some have already said that they will, some made a more long-term commitment. Wesleyan is a test optional institution and was prior to COVID. We've been test optional since 2013. So this is this is not new for us in the test optional environment. So I'm certainly happy to answer questions about sort of how that works in our process. So just a few things about test optional and kind of testing trends over the past year. So the College Board, and this is obviously just one segment because we also receive tests from the ACT, but College Board reports the SAT submission dropped by 33% during this cycle. So we do know, sort of factually that fewer students were submitting, and submitting fewer scores to colleges and universities as they were for their test optional institutions. Over 1,300 colleges in the United States have already determined that they will be test optional for the next admission cycle, so 21-22. That is probably a mix of schools that were already test optional, prior to COVID, and schools that have made the decision to remain test optional, at least on a short-term basis. And again, what we don't know is if any of those changes will become permanent. As you probably know, or maybe don't, I guess the College Board is phasing out subject tests. So the schools that there are very few schools that require subject tests anymore, and that will obviously no longer be able to be possible because subject tests will no longer be available to students regardless of whether they are within the United States or outside the US. So some of those testing has already stopped and it's being phased out worldwide. As I said, many colleges in the United States were test optional. So to just give you some scale here, 1,300 colleges, that's a lot of colleges. We have about 4,000 degree granting, institutions of higher education in the United States. And so it is actually not even half, of our schools here. But many, many schools, I think we were up to maybe over 1,000 schools in the US that were already test optional prior to COVID. This was part of their, admission process. And I would be, honestly very surprised if we don't see that trend continue in that direction, especially as schools have sort of been forced to, experiment with test optional admission. I would imagine many of them will choose to remain in that space. And so I think, we will see continuing trends toward test optional and even test blind admission. So a test blind institution would not consider test scores, even if a student wished to have them considered. And there are, increasingly, a very small number, but increasing numbers of schools that are working in the test blind space. So I think some of the questions, Marty brought this up, at the beginning of the session are about, sort of, should you test, are you at a disadvantage, if you choose not to, first and foremost, if taking a test endangers your safety, you absolutely should not do it. You should opt on the side of, especially, given that schools are test optional and many are test optional, to make decisions based on, your health and safety first and foremost. So that is the first thing I would say. And I can't speak for other schools, but certainly for Wesleyan, you do not have to justify that to us. You do not have to explain why you did not test. We are a test optional school and it is your choice. I can't speak for every school. Again, I can speak for us in that you are at absolutely no disadvantage if you choose either not to take a test or to not submit a test score to us. And so it's every student's choice, and it should be every student's choice to look at their overall application, their overall profile, and decide if their testing is something that they want to be part of their application. And so I think I can speak for the folks who are going to be represented at this event today. If you have questions about testing in our process, whether you should submit or not, how that would play out in your application, please come directly to us and ask us. This shouldn't be a mystery, and it should be something that we can counsel you on and help you with. So that's really talking in the SAT, ACT space. We did want to make sure that we spent a little time on English proficiency testing. So this is something that in many ways is kind of merged with overall, standardized testing, but is also very much distinct because it is for a different purpose, right? So the SAT and ACT is, in theory, intended to, help us get some sense of college readiness and academic skills. English proficiency testing is laser focused on proficiency in the English language to the level necessary to do the academic work that you need to do at one of our schools. And so many schools require some type of proof of English proficiency, and for many schools that would be testing. So you really want to make sure that you understand each individual school's policy around English proficiency testing. Every school may have a different policy. It is not safe to assume that because you are in an IB program and you attend a UWC school, that you will not need to submit other proof of English proficiency. So it's really important that when you sort of narrow down your list of schools you're interested in, if you're applying to, one of our, Davis partner school or US schools in general, that you then find out from each individual school exactly what their expectations are. The most common, so probably the most widely applicable tests would be obviously the TOEFL internet-based test, which is, is available typically in a large number of places. There are upsides and downsides. It's an in-person test. It's a little bit more costly. So there are some, reasons why TOEFL may not be the best fit. IELTS, similar costs, similar sort of in-person type of test, although they are administered differently. Usually in US institutions, TOEFL and IELTS are fairly interchangeable in terms of submission. Duolingo English test, that's something that actually typically Duolingo will work with, with the UWC schools to provide opportunities to take the Duolingo test. Typically that can be done for free. So it's definitely a test that you can access. If you don't get a free test, it's much less expensive than a TOEFL or IELTS exam. And because of COVID, increasingly larger, numbers of schools are accepting the Duolingo test as a full proof of English proficiency. We're one of those schools. We did it for a couple of years prior to that. So that's an at home or at school, on your own, sort of on demand online test. It can be taken on a phone, on a laptop. So there's an accessibility there. And you may have heard, of a new test called TOEFL Essentials, which is a test that's being offered by the College Board. It's brand new. I think it's rolling out in May. So that would be something to check back with schools to see if they'll accept that. So again, the purpose is to provide reassurance. Many of our institutions may have minimal or no remediation of English. So we need to be sure that you have kind of, hit the ground running English skills for the level of academic work that we do. We're not looking for perfect scores. Most schools will tell you kind of the level of score that we believe sort of demonstrates proficiency for students. So the good news, there is definitely good news. Test scores will, almost certainly have less influence in this process. There will be more and more test optional and test blind institutions to apply to in the United States. You are all, enrolled in an international baccalaureate program. It is recognized in the United States. We understand it. We understand the rigor, and the level of work that you're doing in that program. And so students who are successful in the IB, colleges should have a great deal of confidence in your ability to be ready for college. And these tests that are being able to be taken from home, we're really going to be, I think, an opportunity for students to have more access to particularly English proficiency testing that will allow you to, be a candidate who can demonstrate those skills in a cleaner way through that testing. And so we're really excited about those opportunities. And some of those are pre-COVID, but some of those have been definitely motivated by the realities of the world in which we live. So we do think that there are some, some outcomes. I think the downside, if there is one, is just that every school in the United States is different. Every school sets their own policies. Every school has their own, sort of way. You might apply with the same application, but there are different, requirements that you need to look for. So it's really important to be organized. It's really important never to make assumptions and to always go directly to the school and the source and find out what that school is looking for. And to not be afraid of us. We are there. One of the things many of us don't have in our title, but is there, invisibly, is counselor. And we really are here to counsel you and to help you and to decide decide what's the best way to put forward your most, your strongest application to our institution. So that's a little bit, some of it is unknown, but this is what we do know. I'm happy to take any questions that folks have. So I don't know if we
That's
want to,
great,
I
Tara.
guess I can, let me
Yeah,
pop
we've
out.
got a couple questions already.
Okay.
Doug? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so do you want to read them to me and I'll just
Yeah,
go
sure,
ahead
I'll read them.
Great,
Yeah.
awesome.
Does international students mean U.S. passport holding students who live outside the U.S. as well?
That's going to be a little different school to school. My own, our policy is based on where you live and your self-reported first language. So if your first language is not English and you live outside of the United States, then we would ask for English proficiency testing, because in my opinion, your citizenship is not necessarily related to your language proficiency. And so we drive that based on where the students are physically and what they are reporting to us as their first language that they speak. So that is how we do it, but some schools do it based on citizenship. So again, this is a really important one to drill down and ask individual schools.
Right, thank you. Second question is, does SAT count as an English proficiency test?
Yes, I'm going to give the same answer. The answer is sometimes, and not always. There are some schools that will allow the SAT or ACT with certain scores to be used as proof of English proficiency. We do allow that at Wesleyan. So we ask for students to have a particular score on the evidence-based reading and writing section of the SAT, or a combination of scores on the ACT, so the reading and the English sections of the ACT. It's a relatively high score, but it's typically attainable for students who have, proficient English, but not always. And so sometimes we have students who have adequate TOEFLs, perfectly fine, and don't have those scores on SAT or ACT. The advantage, obviously, is taking one test and having it be used for both, if you want to submit SAT or ACT, and also for English proficiency. But they're not exactly the same test. So our perspective is that if you can score at that level, you are demonstrating English proficiency. And some students do that. It's really up to you. So again, that's going to be one look at individual schools. I would say it's probably less common, just anecdotally, than it is common, that schools will take SAT and ACT, but some will, for sure.
Sure. And a couple of questions related to that in terms of other options for English proficiency. Obviously, students that are at UWCs doing full IB, if they're taking English A, does that exempt them at your school?
Depends on the school. So not at Wesleyan. We do not exempt students based on language of instruction or any individual courses taken. We only do it based on testing. But there are other schools that will exempt based on English A, will exempt based on the IB program, will exempt based on language of instruction in English for a certain number of years. So again, that's when you'll need to check with individual schools.
So for students who are been at their IB school for their entire their UWC school for their entire high school career at Wesleyan, would that exempt them?
No, no, we don't exempt based on language of instruction.
Oh, I thought
or the IB. No, we don't. So, but some schools do. Some schools will look at 3 or 4 years of English language instruction.
Okay. Good. And one final question, looks like this came up in the morning session as well, about does not taking the SAT essay affect my chance of admission?
The essay?
Yeah, the question is about essay, but maybe it's more broadly. If you're test optional, if you don't submit, does that impact your chances of admission?
Not at Wesleyan, definitely not. I think for us, if you submit your scores, we will consider them. So I think that's important as you're sort of thinking about whether you want to submit your scores. You want to be thinking critically about how that fits into your overall application. Is it going to be a positive part of your application? I always say it's test optional for the student, not for me. So I cannot choose to put my hand over the score and pretend it's not there. If it's there, I have to sort of factor it into my evaluation of the student. If the student chooses not to submit it, then it just isn't part of the evaluation. So for us, it's quite clean and very easy for us to do that kind of evaluation. So I can say with 100% assurance that choosing not to submit scores is never a disadvantage, in our process. I would say so I tell students on the fence, choose not to submit versus submission if you really don't know what to do, because you can't hurt yourself by choosing not to submit. Other schools, present that slightly differently, but for us, I think that's absolutely true.
And a related question, are colleges expecting a justification if they cannot take an SAT?
There are some schools that seem to sort of want one. I think
Yeah.
those are very few and far between.
True.
Very, very few schools will ask you to, in some way explain why you didn't sit an exam. I do not care. I don't want to know. It's not important to me. It's not a part of our evaluation. Because we're test optional, we just assume maybe you did sit the exam and we're not seeing it. Maybe, whatever reason that you've chosen is your reason and yours alone. And we don't expect any kind of justification for that.
Great. Thank you, Tara.
Yeah, no
And
problem.
there is one question asking how they contact you. So if you
Sure.
could answer that one yourself or drop it
Yeah,
into the chat
absolutely.
so people.
Yeah, I will put it in the chat so that you all can have it. So this is my email address if you do have questions after the session. I also will be in the drop-in time to meet with colleges for the first section, and then I'll have a colleague who is covering the second half of that. So feel free to drop by with any other questions, but certainly feel free to ask these questions too of most of the schools, who are going to be here today are test optional right now. So you can ask these questions of them as well.
Great. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
Tara.
Thank you all.
All right, next up, we have Annie Sullivan from Mount Holyoke. And Annie's going to be walking us through her session today on applying early, what you need to know if you're a UWC student and potential impacts on financial aid packages and all of those wonderful details you have. So take it away, Annie.
Marty, can you confirm slides look good? Everything's up?
They do look good. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. Again, as Marty said, I'm Annie Sullivan. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate director of international admission at Mount Holyoke College. I'm here to talk a little bit more about applying early and what you need to know about that. Of course, I'm going to be speaking specifically to U.S. institutions. I have very little knowledge and understanding about admission processes in other countries. So I'm speaking to that. And much like Tara was saying, I do not work at all 4,000 institutions in the US. So I'm going to try my best to generalize while also being able to be informative. So certainly you will see things that are outliers to what I'm talking about today, but hopefully this is a really helpful knowledge base as you begin your search as well. I also figured that before we talk a little bit about applying early, it might be helpful to define what is applying regular and what is a regular admission plan. So really briefly, the timeline for applying is regular admission plan, regular decision, typically means that you're submitting an application around January. I think January 15th is a really common deadline for like a regular decision application, although that can of course vary. And then colleges basically will read your application, go through all of our processes, make decisions, and notify you of your decision on or before April 1st. So it's kind of like 3.5 months process for us to review and release those admission decisions by April 1st. And then you can kind of take a look at all of your admission offers, scholarship offers, financial aid offers throughout the month of April. And then you basically are asked to pick your college, submit your enrollment deposit, and pick your school by May 1st. So that's kind of like the regular timeline. And that's what we're talking about when we're saying regular decision. So early can vary a lot more, but as the name suggests, it often means you're applying earlier. So early deadlines, there are several different kinds that we'll talk about. Typically start in November. November 1st is a very common deadline for a first early application, although that definitely can vary earlier and later than that as well. Some schools will have multiple rounds of early decision, early action applications. And so you might see some in November, December, January, all across the board. But early deadlines are typically smaller pools than that regular decision deadline. So we can turn around those application decisions a little bit quicker as well. So it might take 1 to 2 months as opposed to 3 or 3.5 from when you submit your application to when you receive your admission decision. And then the deadline by which when you have to make your college decision varies as well. We're going to talk a little bit about those options. Sometimes there's an early deadline by which you'd have to say, I am enrolling in this institution. Other times it's May 1st, kind of like that regular decision timeline. So more variability, but as the name suggests, it typically means you're going through this process a little bit earlier than those regular decision plans. So I mentioned that there's several different options I'm going to kind of quickly cover three major early plans that you see and some of the similarities and differences. And these are the ones that I'm familiar with. There may be others, but I think you'll see these the most often. So first, I'm going to talk about early decision. We love to abbreviate things in the admission world, so we call it ED for short, early decision. And this is kind of the most restrictive or the most strict application deadline that you can apply under. And what this means, it's a binding application deadline. And that means that if you're applying early decision, you can only submit one early decision application. So you couldn't apply early decision to Mount Holyoke and Wesleyan at the same time. You'd have to pick one. Because what you're saying if you're applying early decision is that if you're admitted, you are going to accept that offer of admission and enroll in that institution. You're saying that you're going to withdraw any other applications that you've submitted in the meantime. You don't need to know what those offers are. You don't need to know what financial aid packages you might get or what scholarship offers you might get. You're ready to commit to that institution basically from the moment that you submit your application. And because you're ready to commit right away and you're saying that you're going to commit right away, you don't get until May 1st to weigh your options and decide. You are going to be required to enroll in that institution earlier, typically within maybe 2 to 4 weeks of receiving your admission decision. Now, you are going to sign an agreement that says that you both understand this process and that you agree to abide by it. And so is your school counselor, and so is a parent or a guardian. So we take it very seriously, and we do ask for you and your counselor and your guardian or parent to hold you accountable to this process as well. So that's the most strict, most restrictive deadline. Kind of on the other side of that are early action deadlines. So early action deadlines are a lot more flexible. They're the most flexible of early plans that you might have. And it's very simple. Basically, you apply by this early action deadline, which is earlier than their regular deadline. And you have until May 1st to decide whether or not you want to attend that institution. You aren't required to withdraw any other applications. You can apply early action to as many schools as you want. You can apply regular decision, and then you can collect all of those offers of admission and make your choice by May 1st. If you're applying early action, you can apply to one early decision school, right? Or you can apply to multiple early action schools. So early action is very flexible. Then there's this deadline in the middle called restrictive early action or single choice early action. And in essence, it's a little bit of both. It's stricter in the sense that what you will see with restrictive early action and single choice early action is you're only allowed to submit one early application. So basically, if early is in the deadline, you're saying that this is the only one I'm going to apply to. But you're not required, you're not obligated to attend that institution. So you still can apply regular to as many other schools as you want. And you have until May 1st to kind of look at all of your offers and make a decision. So it's a little bit of a hybrid. You don't see restrictive early action as much as you see early decision and early action, but you do see it among some of the most selective institutions in the US. So I did want to make sure I highlighted that today as well. Okay, so I'm generalizing a lot with this timeline, but I thought it would be helpful just really quickly to see a visual that those early decision, early action timelines typically will start in November and go sometimes through January, whereas regular decision is typically in January. The reason there's such a wide variety of those early timelines is because there can be multiple rounds. So at Mount Holyoke, for example, we have early decision 1 on November 15th, and we have early decision 2 on January 1st. So some schools might have early decision and early action. They might just have one. They might have 2 early actions. There's all sorts of combinations out there. We all do things just a little bit differently, which makes it really fun for you guys as you're going through this process. So there is this very common notion out there that it's easier to get into colleges if you apply early. And in researching for this presentation, I was looking through some not very reputable college websites that we hear students talk about a lot, like College Vine or Niche or things like that. And they all say colleges will tell you it's not easier to get in early, but the statistics will show you something different. And I'm here to tell you that it depends and that statistics can be deceiving. So while you very well might see higher admission rates in some of these early rounds than in regular rounds, I think that it's a lot more important for you to kind of understand the populations that might be applying early rather than viewing that as, okay, they let more people in. I have a couple of bad grades in there. I'll have a better chance of getting in early. I can assure you that we all use the same level of rigor and the same, we're looking for the same qualities in early applicants as we do in regular applicants. The difference is more of who is applying early rather than we're letting people in with lower standards than regular applications. A couple of examples include what you'll often see is students who maybe are recruited athletes and have been talking to coaches for a while, or they might be submitting arts portfolios and those requirements are early. You might see students who are legacies or who have older siblings who've gone through the process and their families are more comfortable with this process. Financial ability, whether there is more financial resources or fewer, can impact who is in those early rounds and who is applying early. And also your school resources, what's available to you. All of you have fantastic school counselors. They are all encouraging you to start this process early. That's why you're all here today. And so they're helping you craft those applications, put together those lists, helping you figure out when you need to do what steps of the process so that you can be ready for those early deadlines. Other students might be one of 700 students on a counselor's caseload. Maybe that student is the only person in their school looking at colleges and universities in the US. It's also possible that counselor doesn't speak or read English and doesn't know how to guide a student through this process, or they might not have a counselor at all. So there's a lot that kind of goes into whether or not why those admission rates are higher. It's far more about that population than it is about having lower standards or being easier to get in early. So with that said, what deadline should you choose? And it really kind of comes back to first, what are you most comfortable and what are you ready for? And as we like to say, Tara's already been saying it, the answer in admissions is often it depends. Each school does this a little bit different and each of you are different. So I would first ask yourself if you are ready to commit to a binding deadline. So Mount Holyoke, we have early decision and we have regular decision. So if you're applying early, you are saying to us that if you're admitted, you are going to enroll. So if you're not ready to make that commitment, then you're not ready to apply early decision for Mount Holyoke. Early action, that is a different story. You have more flexibility you don't have to sign on the dotted line at that point in time. So those are a little bit different. Is your application ready? Are you actually ready to apply early? Has your essay gone through the drafts that you're happy with where it is? Have you given enough thought into those supplemental essays? Did you give your teachers and counselors plenty of time to write recommendations, or did you just make that request last week? Tara talked about standardized test requirements, TOEFL, IELTS, all of these things. Have you taken those tests before the deadline, or are you going to try and take it after the deadline because your application might be reviewed and decided on as incomplete at that point? So are you actually ready? Do you have all the components ready to submit your best application? Or would you be better off waiting until January because you're going to have more time to put it together? And then briefly, because I know we're going to hear a lot more about finances, this can be a factor in helping you decide whether or not to apply early or regular or what. I travel and present with schools who all have very different answers to this question. Some schools will encourage students who are seeking the highest financial aid awards that they offer to apply early. That's where they award those largest financial aid awards. Other schools will say, we want you to apply regular because we want to see all of the students who are seeking those awards and make choices from the full group of students. And then still, other institutions will say, it doesn't matter, apply whichever round you want. We'll consider you in your financial need in any of those. So again, talk to us, ask us here today, talk to your counselors to help you figure out how to approach those questions later on once you decide your list. And that can help you kind of figure out which schools you maybe should apply to early or which ones you might want to wait until regular for. That's kind of what I have for you all today. That's the end of my little segment here. So thank you all for listening. I'm not sure where we are with time, if we want to do Q&A or if we're going to Danielle and catching back later.
Sure. We have a couple minutes for questions, Annie, and you've actually touched on the answer right at the end there to what a lot of folks were asking about.
Okay.
And what if you don't receive the financial aid that you were expecting and are not able to afford the early decision university? And the answer is it depends. But for most Davis partner institutions, that's a different answer, right? In terms
of So there mostly Davis partner institutions and many others, schools will meet full need. Although that's based on what the schools assess, you don't actually decide how much you're going to pay to go to college. You submit these financial aid applications, and that's how that amount is calculated. And so sometimes it does happen where you get admitted, you get that award. The college has deemed that is a reasonable amount. Your family might see it otherwise. And so you have to work with those financial aid offices to get those questions answered. But there are instances where students are released from those early decision agreements because of that financial offer. But that does mean that you have to work with the financial aid offices to try and identify the problem and resolve it first. But there are instances where students are then released from those early decision agreements. Right. That does mean they're released. That means that they can't come back later and say, actually, this was my best offer, I want to come. You are declining your offer. So it's not something that you could later on say, never mind, I do want to come. So you would be saying goodbye to that school at that moment.
That's great. Thank you for that. And someone has asked if there's a list of Davis partner institutions. I'll be providing a link to that, and I'll answer that question to you directly. And I'll also put it in the chat. But thank you so much, Annie. There are some questions that if you have a chance while Danielle's speaking to answer that are specific about your topic, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Right. And hello to Danielle Diddy at Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania. She's going to run us through the topic you've all been waiting for, how to secure financial aid as a Davis scholar, UWC Davis scholar. So Annie, take it away.
Thank you, Marty. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right, sounds good. So as Marty said, my name is Danielle Diddy. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Admission at Gettysburg College. I'm also the Coordinator of International Recruitment. And today I'm going to talk about securing financial aid. So first, when you're talking to a university representative, the first thing you really want to do is understand what costs you are expecting or what costs you can expect to see when you're applying or if you're accepted at that university. So there are some direct costs and indirect costs. So for example, tuition, room and board, so room and meal plan. These are kind of the costs that you'll see on brochures. These costs can be a little intimidating when you first look at them, but you will see throughout this presentation that there is a lot of financial aid and scholarship opportunities, specifically in the United States. Some indirect costs that you want to keep a mind on is the CFIS fees, health insurance. Some colleges will require you to use their health insurances, which can be a little more pricier than if you were to find health insurance on your own. Taxes, if you get a full financial aid package, sometimes the government will tax that. Books and supplies, transportation, how are you getting to the United States? That can be quite expensive, especially if you need to get a passport and all those documentations. Personal and miscellaneous expenses. If you're in a warm climate and you're coming to northern, United States, you might need to buy a winter coat for the first time. You might need to buy bedding when you get to your campus. So those are questions to ask your admission counselors or even, the international directors of international services once you're on campus or before you come. Some things I like to point out with the direct and indirect costs is some universities and colleges will provide some financial aid for indirect costs in their financial aid packages, while others will not. Most likely, there will still be some money, even if you get a full financial aid package that you need to cover. That could be the transportation and money for your books and supplies. That could be, your personal miscellaneous expenses. These are all things to think about. There will most likely be some costs that will still need to be provided by you or your family. Another question when you're thinking about cost to expect is living costs. Especially if you're at a campus where maybe they only provide housing for the first year and you might have to get an apartment your second, third, and fourth year and provide your own food. What is the living cost of the city or town that you're in? You might be on a campus where you can live on campus all 4 years, and that might be a little cheaper than campuses where you would have to live off campus in a city. Another question asked is working on campus. In the United States, we allow our students to work on campus. From your visa, you can work on campus up to 20 hours a week. This varies in different countries. I know, for example, I travel with somebody in Canada, so I know this. In Canada, you can work on or off campus for 20 hours a week. I'm not sure the other country laws with this, but it is also something to ask. And then as you're evaluating all the institutions that you've been accepted to, ask the international students, how easy was it for you to find a job on campus? Do you enjoy working on campus? Are you just working in the cafeteria, or are you doing research with faculty members and getting paid for it? So these are all things to look for when you're thinking of what costs to expect. Next thing is what aid is available. There is a lot of different, words that are going to be thrown at you, and I don't want you to be overwhelmed by them. So I'm going to break it down. So first is scholarships. I hear a lot of students, and I will mention this later on as well, is, well, does your school offer a full scholarship? There is no really thing as a full scholarship. If there is, I guess there is, but it's very few in between. So when we say scholarships, there's different types of scholarships. There's merit scholarship. This is looking at your academics. So purely looking at your grades. If you're applying to an institution that requires your SAT or ACT, it's looking at your test scores. It's purely looking at what you academically did throughout high school. There are some institutions that also offer talent and arts scholarships, such as if you want to be a creative writing major and maybe you submit a creative writing portfolio, they might award scholarships based on your creative writing portfolio. If they have a conservatory or big music program on campus, they might provide different types of music scholarships based on your auditions. The last type of scholarship is a sports scholarship. Sorry, my screen went off there. Sorry. There we go. So the last scholarship is a sports scholarship. And this is something to keep in mind with this is that D1 and D2 schools provide some sports scholarship, but D3 schools do not provide sports scholarships. So that's another question I get quite a bit. I'm a D3. Gettysburg College is, oh, we're having problems with the presentation still. Sorry. Technical. Here we go. Does it look okay now?
Good.
Okay, sorry about that. So D3 schools do not provide sports scholarships. Now we're gonna get to the need-based financial aid. Something to ask admission representatives as you're popping in rooms today is to ask them, are you need aware or need blind? This means when an institution is need aware, you will need to submit all the financial aid documents with the application. And they do take into consideration your financial need as part of the application process. Need blind does not require financial aid documents as part of the application, and they will not look at your need anywhere throughout that. What that also means is that perhaps they're not going to be able to provide the financial aid and scholarships that you would need to attend their institution. Financial aid is more common in the United States. So if your counselor is really pushing you to apply in the United States, that might be because a lot of institutions in other countries do not offer need-based financial aid as part of their financial aid package. Instead, they only offer the scholarships. Your Davis scholarship is need-based, so that's also something to keep in mind. And finally, you're going to hear this a lot, but it is very limited. So while a lot of institutions in the United States do offer need-based financial aid to international students, it is a very, very competitive process. And as Annie mentioned, as part of the Davis partnership, since we are partnership schools, we do have a commitment to meet the full needs of Davis scholars that we accept to our institutions. So next, how do you apply for financial aid? There is different forms, and as you've heard a lot throughout this presentation, it depends on the school that you're applying to. So 3 of the most popular forms is the CSS profile. This does have a $25 fee. A lot of institutions, if you email them and ask for a fee waiver, they will be able to provide a fee waiver. There's the International Student Financial Aid Application, also known as ISFA. This is a free application. And then there's the certification of finance form. Again, some institutions might require all of these forms and applications with your application deadline. Others might require it after you've been accepted to the institution. These applications might seem a little intimidating at first. They really want to get to understand the amount of money that your family can contribute to education each year. So they're going to ask for your address, how many siblings you might have in your family. It's really specific forms. If you have questions about any of the forms, reach out to us. We are happy to help you with those. And it's really important to be honest in these forms. These forms are going to tell us, how much of a financial aid package you need. So it's important that you give us and be as transparent as possible so we can give you the money that you need to come to our institutions. Some tips and tricks. I had mentioned some of the common misconceptions that I hear from students. The first is, I should expect a full scholarship. Again, there's no real thing as a full scholarship. A lot of students, when they're applying, especially to US institutions, they're going to get a combination of scholarships, but also financial aid. And in a financial aid package, it's important to understand the different types of financial aid that students are provided. So you're going to have a grant in your financial aid package, and a grant is money that the institution is giving you. You don't have to pay it back. Work study is often in a financial aid package. So that is, money that you can anticipate to get if you're working on campus throughout both semesters. And then finally, not all schools, but some schools will also have a loan as part of their financial aid package. And loans are money that you have to pay back to the institution after you graduate. So that's also something, as you're talking to university reps today, to ask, what does your financial aid package look like? If it is loans, what percentage of the financial aid package could possibly be loans? And then again, other countries offer financial aid just like the US. That is very not true. The US is very friendly and kind when it comes to giving out merit scholarship and additionally financial aid packages. Know the deadlines. This is really important. As I talked about the financial aid applications, if you have to apply by the date of the application, it's important you get those documents into us so that we can evaluate those financial aid forms with your application. Another deadline that you might want to keep in mind is special scholarships. Some colleges offer special scholarships, whether it's civic engagement, or if you have to do the audition for the music program. Make sure you know these deadlines so that you have the opportunity, if you're interested, to be considered for that scholarship. I can't tell you how many times a student will email me after a scholarship deadline and ask if they can still apply. And unfortunately, we may have already reviewed all those applicants and made our decision. So please don't miss out on those deadlines and be sure that you're contacting us. Demonstrated interest. Annie did a phenomenal job at talking about early decision. This is just something else that you want to talk to admission counselors and see if that early decision is a part of the financial aid package. If you apply early decision, is there a better chance if you're a high need student of getting accepted, or should you apply regular decision? Most importantly, listen to your counselor. They are used to working with all of us. They know our institutions really well. They know our admissions criteria really well. So please, your counselors are there to help you. They want to see you succeed. They have great advice. Make sure you're asking them and listening to them, and then contact us. As Annie and Tara both said multiple times throughout this presentation, it depends by institution and institution what our different practices and rules and application deadlines and all that is. So make sure you're contacting us and listening to your counselor. I know that was a lot of information and it was in a very short amount of time. So if you have questions, I think we have a little bit of time here for questions, but if you have questions afterwards, I will be in my Zoom room, but also there is my contact information as well. I'm sorry for the technical glitch.
Thanks so much, Annie. And as we mentioned earlier, all of the presentations that have been given today will be available in PDF format on the landing page for the event, which I'll give you the link to in just a couple of minutes. But before we do that, we do have one question here for Annie. I know Tara was busy answering a lot of questions that were popping in during the session that were more basic. But Annie, if you are, excuse me, Danielle, if you could answer this one. What happens if your financial situation changes after the application deadline?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And again, it's going to vary throughout different institutions. I know that at many institutions that I work closely with in Gettysburg as well, if a financial situation changes, we will often ask students to resubmit their financial forms, as well as kind of explain what caused a financial change. And, we've experienced a lot of this over the last year plus with the COVID-19 pandemic. So our financial aid offices are used to working with these, but then we basically file an appeal, and our financial aid office will reevaluate and review the student's financial aid forms with the different change in the circumstances, and in most cases, will reward a higher financial aid package.
Wonderful. Great explanation. Thank you for that, Danielle. Now, Danielle, Tara, and Ani, it's now time for you to make way to your Zoom rooms so you can be ready for the students when you, well, we got one last question for you, Danielle. It's a Pennsylvania related question. What are your top 3 must-sees in Pennsylvania?
Oh my goodness, that's hard. So a lot of students will want to see the Liberty Bell because it's very historical. For me, I might be a little biased, but Gettysburg, Pennsylvania is a great place. It is a world famous town, so I definitely would recommend checking out Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And a third one, I don't know if it's a must-see, but Philly is an amazing town. I'd also recommend checking out Philly.
Not the Hershey Chocolate Factory?
Hershey Chocolate Factory, that's a good one as well.
If you like chocolate. All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Danielle. I'll let you get to your rooms, and also to Tara and Annie, thank you for your presentations. And I'll jump back on here and I'll share with you very quickly the landing page for the event. And this is going to be where we're going to direct you to immediately after we're done with this last few moments here. I wanted to give Danielle, Annie, and Tara a chance to get to their rooms, to get a drink water before they start. And this landing page, I put the link to it in the chat. So you will get that in just a moment. I'll pop that out in just a second to make sure it's there. Now, this landing page is something I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. One, click on the link in the chat. So it opens up on your browser, a window on your browser. So bookmark that page. Once it's open, bookmark it, favorite it, whatever you need to do. Because that's a page you're going to come back to after you're done with each visit to a college or university Zoom room. So we make this as simple as possible, given the environment that we have. Hubertus, thanks for being on. It's great to connect with you here. Hope your students find this to be a very productive day. And for all of you, what I'm going to show you right now, you're seeing on the screen, this is the landing page again for the event. What it has on it, on the left side of the screen, you see participating institutions, and you see there are 26 universities names or colleges names listed here. The name where the link that is underlined under their college name, that takes you directly to their Zoom room. So I know for one of them, I think Union College, there's a quick registration form you fill out as well. But before you get into that room. But for all of these, clicking on the university name will get you to meet with the university representatives and college representatives that are here. Some of them have current UWC students that have graduated or have graduated from UWC schools, are now attending their universities or colleges that might be in the rooms as well. So some of them will have that experience waiting for you. If you also want the opportunity to schedule an interview, and I must preface this remarks, I've let the counselors know that this is an option for most all of the schools that are listed here, but these aren't the formal scholarship interviews that you would be going through if you choose to apply to these schools next year. Not all of the schools require formal interviews. Some do, some don't. Some won't do it until later in the fall. So that's when you click on the links for these, either to email the director of admissions or a particular person to schedule an interview, or click on the link for schedule an interview. That may just be an opportunity for you after today to schedule a one-on-one call, voice call, Zoom call, whatever you want, with that counselor or with that admissions representative. So it's an opportunity. This page itself will be here for you for the foreseeable future until we hold our next virtual visit day, probably sometime in the fall, since we're likely not going to be able to get physically back to your schools for visits yet. But we do want to give you the option to get those appointments with individual college representatives that are going to be on the calls today. So do take advantage of that. We also, on the right side of the screen, you see the details about the sessions you've just seen. What we'll have after this session is done, there will be the afternoon sessions. We're going to have the recorded presentations available, and there'll be a link to the video for today's sessions that you might want to check back on in case you think you missed something. And then the PDFs of the presentations, as I mentioned, they're already live on the page, on the landing page for the event. So you'll be able to download any of the presentations you just heard from Tara, from Annie, or from Danielle. So please feel free to bookmark this page anyway as a resource for you in the coming weeks and months as you make the decisions that you're going to be making. But please, first of all, bookmark this page. The link is in the chat for smieconsulting.org/UWC-virtual-visit-days. So hopefully bookmark that, and then in just about 20 seconds or so, you'll be able to head into the individual college reps, individual Zoom rooms, and begin the conversations from there. I'll be popping in and out of the rooms just to make sure everybody's up and running. But for now, we want to thank you again for taking the time to be a part of this event today. And we're really looking forward to seeing the results of your conversations, and I'll be talking to the representatives about that. You will get an email after the event that will ask you to quickly fill out a quick survey that just lets us know what your experiences were, how you felt about the different sessions you saw. So appreciate your time today and wish you the best of luck in your conversations, and go forth. Have a great day.